I saved a lot of lives that night.
Everyone needs to get off the dance floor!
Lives that were never meant to be saved. But Death doesn't like it when you mess with his plans.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Collider Interviews YouTube channel for one of my favorite types of conversations in the world. It's a Final Destination conversation. I have directors Adam Stein and Zach Lipovsky here, and we are talking full Final Destination Bloodlines spoilers.
Spoilers. Okay, love it.
Full spoilers.
Love it.
Free and clear to talk about whatever you want.
Spoiler alert, they die.
Yeah, they do. They do in the most spectacular fashions. Before I even get into all of my questions here, sincerely, congratulations and thank you. One of the coolest things in the world is when you get a new installment of one of your favorite film franchises. And I mean, instantly it skyrockets to the top of my rankings.
Oh, man.
That
means a lot.
It's honestly up there. Your movie is just so good at embracing the bombastic, crazy reasons why I love this franchise, but the Bloodline storyline is so smart and character forward. It's just, I don't know, it feels like the perfect marriage for a horror movie.
That's what we
so
thought
great.
too, yeah. When we heard they were making another Final Destination, we were a little nervous because 5 has such a great ending. It kind of feels like that wraps it all up. And then when we started to learn about the Bloodlines idea and realized all the potential that it could create on a character level, but also on a horror level, because our premise that we were telling the studio was if we care about these people more and they care about each other more, it'll make the stakes of all of these set pieces even more intense. And we tried to just push that as far as we could.
You push it so hard in the best possible ways. I'm so pumped. Before I get into all of my nitty-gritty detail kind of questions, I wanted to start with a couple of, tee-up ones, but this first one is a broad franchise question because it's a conversation that I've been having since the day I became a Final Destination fan. Basically just trying to figure out what it is about Death's design and watching a group of characters get picked off in the most extreme ways that speaks to me most. So I'll toss that idea towards you two now. What is it about the Final Destination concept that, I don't know, really scratches an itch and fills you up as horror lovers?
Well, I think we have a few theories, but we'd be curious to hear yours too. I mean, the first is that it just brings anxiety to life. Everyone has anxieties as they go about their daily lives. And usually you kind of try to quiet those anxieties so you can live. But the horror of Final Destination is what if those anxieties were real and far worse than you ever imagined? I think another aspect of it is that death is, we've all made a pact. We all know we're going to die. In our real lives, death comes for us all.
And that's fair.
And that's and that's just part of living. But the characters in Final Destination have gone against that bargain. They've survived when they shouldn't have. So death coming after them sort of has this sort of settling the scores feeling. And so you sort of end up rooting for death to get them because that's fair.
I think it also allows you to enjoy the deaths in a way that is fun because it's not like Saw or Hostel where the deaths are sort of unfair to the characters. In this case, they've cheated it, so it's kind of fair that they go get taken out, and death does it in such a creative way. Both of those things together allow it to be fun, and it's really rare that you have that kind of experience in a horror film.
I think the cleverness of death is something you end up relishing and rooting for.
Mm-hmm.
Just Death's sense of irony and the plant and the payoff and that he's killing people not just to kill people but doing it in the most fun way he can think of makes it fun for the audience.
Feels especially playful in your movie, and it was a touch that I loved. I definitely have a soft spot for this franchise because it not only sparked my love of watching horror movies, but it was one of the first memories I have of, I guess, processing the beauty of horror movie magic, what happens behind the scenes in order to spark those kinds of reactions in the theater. I also just love the communal reaction that these movies. I was telling you on Friday night when we did our ladies' night screening, as a fan even, it's the most satisfying feeling in the world to hear people respond exactly when you all intended. It's a special thing.
A special treat we've had that most people don't get is during the editing process, we do test screenings, and they record the audience with night vision cameras so you can look at them later. And so there's all these reactions of seeing 100 people holding their nose just in sympathy. or 100 people like kind of covering their like there's all these nonverbal reactions that you get to see of all these people kind of doing it at once. It's pretty awesome.
But that's been my favorite part too, just the theatrical reactions, and little titters of discomfort that like ripple across the audience or laughter. This movie, like you said, is playful. It's a lot funnier, I think, than people expected. But I think the studio at first was like, is it too funny? Is this good? Is it can horror be this funny? And but the audiences were telling us, like, not only did they love the kills, but they love the humor. And you have these moments that are hard to explain. When the kid gets crushed by the piano, 12 minutes into the movie? The entire audience erupts in cheers. Like
everyone in that theater did exactly that.
Yeah. Everyone's cheering for the death of a small child. What is that about? I mean, at first he deserved it. Let's just say that he's a brat. But I think it's like there's a kind of almost Looney Tunes brought to life aspect to that death
with the piano, literally.
That just makes so much sense. It sort of fits. It just fits. But you don't totally see it coming. There's sort of you have a 5-second anticipation after you see the piano go through the window and then it cuts to him. There's just this moment of anticipation.
Yeah.
You're going, oh, and then it happens.
The timing is pretty perfect.
And
we worked very
so
hard
much
to
fun.
kind of scrape his brains. There's a bit of his chunk of his head that kind of rolls along the ground just as he gets crushed. And it was super fun. We actually dropped a real piano from like 80 feet to get that element so that you actually see how a piano explodes when it
You
hits
did
the
a
ground.
lot of stuff like that feels like, I was about to say full blown, which very much leans into blowing up that cabin.
Yeah.
My God, that was very impressive. I'll get to that. I got like a little roadmap here. Before I even dig into the specifics of your movie, though, and I feel bad asking this question because you've probably been asked it a million times, but I do think it sets like a necessary foundation for a franchise lover.
Yeah.
For both of you of all the past films, what single death scene is your absolute favorite?
I think my single it's hard to know if premonitions fit into that, but I would say that
If you want them to, they can.
I think I've always responded to the bridge collapse in FD5 as sort of the kind of ultimate of what I love about Final Destination and all the little kills that are in that, the tempo of it, the scale of it. That's the one I always go back to when I just want to like remind myself what makes FD so great, even though it's a premonition at that kind of giant scale. And there's plenty of other specific deaths that I love, but that's the one that I always come back to. And I live like 5 minutes from that bridge. And they were like building it and like repairing it, and there were giant holes in it, just like in the movie. So I've lived the experience of crossing that bridge while it has holes in it. So that's my special place.
Can't tell if it's bad that I'm just like tickled by that, but I grew up on Long Island in New York, so all the Long Island stuff in the first film, every time I see like the beach, I get really excited.
Exactly.
We ended up driving over that bridge many times with the entire crew in a bus because we were scouting, up the Iris's cabin was the other side of the bridge. So as we're scouting with the crew, we're all packed into this bus going over that bridge back and forth. And every time we were next to the producer, Craig Perri, and we were like, Craig, here it comes. We're trying it again. My favorite premonition is FD2. The logs are unbeatable. The way that whole sequence is choreographed is just incredible. But I think it is interesting to think about specific deaths beyond the premonitions that did influence us very heavily in this movie. One of them was the screw on the balance beam in FD5. It's just so much suspense in watching this tiny thing and all the feet missing it. Nothing's happening when you think about it. It's just a screw, but you're squirming in your seat. You can barely look at it. And that's just such masterful suspense. And that was a big inspiration to the shard of glass in the ice during the barbecue, because we wanted to create that same sense of visceral cringiness, but then also we're very inspired by the way the screw then doesn't kill the person. It just becomes the first domino in the mousetrap, just like the glass then, comes into play in a way you didn't expect.
I love those examples. I have a soft spot for the Miss Luton kill in the first one. Almost how death is somewhat acting like a classic slasher.
Yeah.
And there's just so many little Easter eggs throughout that sequence
The
that
stained
show
glass,
they
yeah.
show exactly what's going to happen. I just adore that sequence.
Yeah, that was the way that they showed that was an inspiration for in the tattoo parlor. There's a giant magnet on the wall and then a circle, a glowing circle, both of which are saying how he's going to die in an MRI machine. So that was inspired by the stained glass window.
Sheila brought up the circle motif the other night, and I hadn't clocked it before, but the second she said it, I'm like, oh, it's all over your movie.
Yeah.
I love touches like that.
Yeah.
I had this question at the top of my list here because I know about how you two pitched to get this gig. Are we ever going to see that pitch video?
No.
You know what? It was live. That's the thing. It doesn't exist. It wasn't recorded.
I thought so.
Which is a bummer. You know, we couldn't record it because it was their Zoom meeting, you know?
Well, maybe they don't have it.
And they've been kicking themselves that they didn't record the meeting. So we have elements of it that were like, you know, little visual effects elements that were part of the Zoom background, but we don't have the whole thing recorded.
I feel like that makes it even better. It's some sort of like wonderful Final Destination myth that everybody can think about the weight of it. When you first signed on to direct this movie, what state was the script in, and how does that original script compare to what the final film became?
Yeah. So Jon Watts had the original concept for building this movie around a family. He had written sort of an opening idea of sort of how the movie would work. There had been a first draft that Guy and Laurie put together of the movie that kind of has generally the same – basically it has the structure that the finished movie is, but I would say almost entirely every set piece, including the opening, changed over the many years. It took years of iterating with everyone. You know, that's how scripts work. You do a first draft and then everyone gets around and you kind of brainstorm and you continue to iterate over and over and over again. And we did that with the writers and with Jon and us and Craig and Sheila, the producers, and sat around Craig's dining room table and just threw around ideas for as long as we could to continue to iterate. It still started in this, I think in the original draft, it started in the 50s. We eventually made it the late 60s. It was a period piece, obviously, but it was set, that first one was actually set on a riverboat, which we were just like, there's no way to like out Titanic in this situation. So, and Adam has a huge fear of heights. So we were trying to think of something that the opening premonitions are a very root fear, like fear of flying, fear of roller coasters, fear of driving. Like we were like, we need something that is a very elemental root fear. And so fear of heights was kind of what we started to build that around. And also in the late 60s, there were a lot of restaurants that were sort of built in that sort of retro-futuristic style. And we wanted it to be the most romantic, you know, beautiful opening premonition that it could be. But we still sort of did carry on. You know, Titanic is one of my all-time favorite movies, and there's definitely a lot of homages to Titanic in that opening sequence that sort of carried over from the riverboat.
Titanic and Jurassic Park.
That's right, yes.
I like your taste. So you just mentioned that the opening premonition changed. During our Q&A the other night, I found out that Darlene's death changed. Yep. Are there any other big changes?
That one we actually filmed. You know, that one changed after production. I mean, every death was different. You know, Eric didn't used to be a tattoo artist. He was like a live stream guy that was killed while he was doing a VR game live stream. So that was him. I remember Julia was like really into monster trucks, and she had a monster truck explode. There are a lot of differences.
Wow.
But that's how movies are. Like they constantly evolve over years of collaboration with the whole team and all the crew, and you know, even big location changes. We were in prep. It looked like instead of the backyard barbecue for a while, it was like a Chuck E. Cheese, sort of like it was called Howard's Happy House. It was going to be like bowling and bumper cars and arcade machines and all that stuff. But we just realized that like about family, it would work better in a backyard as kind of making it also right after a funeral, and just like we were really stretching that after a funeral they'd go to a Chuck E. Cheese.
Yeah, like who would do that? I do really love the fact that I could see the promise in all of like the baseline ideas, but also understand why you would change everything the way you did to serve your story. Now, just because I'm curious, so you told me how some of the characters died, but not Bobby. What was Bobby's original death?
That's a good question. I can't remember it. I don't think it was an MRI. I think it was something different.
I don't remember either. Yeah.
The allergy and the MRI combo was just it is so incredibly effective.
So Owen, the actor who plays Bobby, actually has a peanut allergy.
Oh no.
And we didn't know that when we were casting, but it just was a random, thing, that coincidence. But he brought so much like real, fear to that moment because he relates to it. And also the little moment where he says, maybe I grew out of it. That came from his own like experience, always hoping that he was going to grow out of his allergy.
Feel it when he delivers that line. Backtracking with your cast a little here because I think you put together the perfect ensemble. And I think the perfect ensemble is vital to the success of any Final Destination movie. But again, given the Bloodlines concept, like you needed a group that felt like a real family with history and like weight to their relationship. So big question about that. Of all the main roles in this movie, which was the easiest to cast, where it was like the right person magically appeared? But then I also want to know which role took the most legwork to fill.
Wow, that is such a good question. I mean, so we started with Stephanie because she's sort of the linchpin to the family. And we looked all around the world, really, for this actor. It was a very hard role to audition for because we gave him like the scene that's like 2 pages of monologue about, the family and the history and Iris. And a lot of people took that into more of an expositional kind of book report place. And it was a really hard scene to nail. And Caitlin, from the very beginning, brought so much urgency to it, and her panic grew as her family interrupted her, and it was just so real and so personal that she like rose to the top right away. So I think it's funny because that was the linchpin for starting the family casting, but in some ways it was like the one that was most obvious from the beginning. So that was really great.
I brought that scene up to her the other night because like that's not easy to deliver all of that exposition in a way that like has that urgency. You feel the weight, but it also doesn't take away from the energy of being sandwiched between these big epic kill scenes. And she just does that beautifully.
Yeah, absolutely.
A tough one to find was Bobby because Owen really brings this sort of energy at the top that you think maybe he's just sort of a jockey, tough guy or whatever, kind of meathead type presentation. But then immediately you see he's this big softy and he's got all these insecurities and he's got a peanut allergy and he's really worried and he loves his family and he wants help.
And he loves his Paco.
And he loves his turtle and like –
I love Paco.
Finding people that could present as a jock but then also then give you all the depths of these insecurities and anxiety was very difficult to find. And he's so charming and so many of these little improvs that he has in the movie just came from his personality. And so it was so wonderful to find him.
I feel like one thing that came up a whole lot at the junket the other day, which I really appreciate and I feel like is really rare, especially with studio horror movies, is the emphasis everyone put on you giving them time to rehearse, to do improv takes, and to do I'm fascinated by silent takes. That's another video I really want to see. I want to see a take of a scene where it's a silent take. Anyway,
we could probably do. We actually have that one on camera.
That truly, like, it is fascinating to me. Maybe watching something like that, but also what new can come out of a scene without any dialogue.
So that was the other thing. I mean, we found these people that kind of looked like a family, or you could believe as a family. But then through rehearsals, we really started to bring them together and get to know each other. We even rehearsed scenes or put improvised scenes in rehearsal that weren't in the script. Things like what was the party where Stephanie's going away to college. Like, let's do that scene so that they all had kind of a shared history with each other. And they just are all so funny and so talented that they really cracked each other up and got along so well. We did a lot of improv in the auditions, too, to make sure that we were finding people who could do that because we love to use improv as a way to find those little undiscovered gold moments, Usually you improvise with actors and 90 to 95% you can't use because it just goes off the rails but then that 5 to 10% is just so gold that it makes the movie. Some of the biggest laughs, some of the biggest moments in the movie come from improvised lines that just sprung out of the actors' mouths in the moment. And they're just beautiful.
Which character changed the most from script to screen for that reason, where the actors started with what you gave them, and during that process, they found layers that you two never even realized was there?
Yeah, I mean, I think Obviously, Richard, who plays Eric, he's
Yeah.
always been known as just an improvisational actor that's kind of always brings sorts of elements, but he brings it to a level where he's improvising within the emotion while also still being hilarious. So he's because it's tricky when people hear improv, they think, oh shit, now I have to be funny. But he's not doing it at that level. He's really doing it from a character space and level where he's being very dramatic, but also incredibly hilarious. And so that's just a whole nother level. That's
Sometimes
really
the drama of it is what makes it funnier. Like in the moment where he's storming out of the room, completely torn apart because his whole life has been a lie and his real dad is Jerry Fenbury. Every time he left the room, we asked him to say something different. So just like we did like probably 10 takes, and every time he stormed out of the room, he shouted something different, like through tears. And the one that's in the movie, is that why he always wanted to play catch?
So good.
It's just so great. But there were equally brilliant, sometimes weirder ones that we just love too.
And it was so
Is that why he came to all my swim meets?
Is that why he always called me Buckaroo? And then it was hard because all the rest of the cast had to stay in this very mournful, very dramatic, like cry-y type space. And every time he'd run out and you could just see them like doing everything they could to like stay in character and not laugh.
They're so good. They're all so good together. Speaking of improv, I will veer into Tony Todd's scene because I've heard a little bit about how you kind of put the reins in his hands for that moment, and I think it's one of the most beautiful scenes in the entire movie, and it's just so incredibly important to this franchise now, and also just like to the horror community that he was such a big part of, and to all of us fans who loved him so dearly. Yeah. Can you maybe tell me what that scene looked like on the page when you went into filming, and then walk me through how it evolved when you put it in his hands?
I mean, the scene, we worked really closely with him and the writers and everyone to build a scene, which is basically the scene that you see. Like we knew it was going to be a scene that gave an origin to Bloodworth and kind of developed him out a little bit more as a human character rather than as sort of just a mysterious mentor figure, made him just more developed, and he was really excited about that. And we knew that, like you said, that Bloodworth is accepting that he's going to die and is kind of saying goodbye to them and kind of saying he's done with giving random groups of people coming to him, advice. And sort of the designing principle of that scene is as you see it. But really it was the last moment when he's at the door where we had a few lines in there that for him that were as written.
I looked the other day. It actually ended with now that my old friend is gone, I'm retiring. I'm going to enjoy the time I have left. And then he walks out the door.
Yeah. Which
is in our scene where we ended up staging it. It's basically when he's getting up and walking to the door. So what we added was this moment where he stops and turns. And
that's where we basically asked him, Tony, can just speak from the heart about what this has all been about and what's on your mind, right? Because he was ill when we were shooting with him. And he was so full of joy and so excited to be there and cracking jokes and had so much gravitas and love and warmth and all that stuff when he was there. But we were just like, what do you want to say that this has all been about? And so those lines that he has about, how life is precious and you need to enjoy every single second because you never know when. He just kind of said that from the heart. You can kind of see in his eyes that he's speaking like right through the camera to the audience. And I think it was even more impactful to us in the room because he was like living by those words. It wasn't just like something he said because he thought it'd be good in a movie. He that whole day was very special because his mortality was present in the room. You could see how physically just sort of weak he was. But he was cherishing every second and he was loving it and he was so happy to be there and smiling. And so he kind of communicated the message that he was living and it just kind of was such a special moment that we're all like really grateful to be able to kind of capture, and he was grateful to be able to give.
A really special scene in your movie. Like I will specifically thank you for that moment because I always adored him.
Yeah.
He was one of the perfect examples to me of an opportunity where you should meet your hero because he cared as much as I did about all of the horror work he's done.
Yeah.
He loved cats. He was just like such like a warm presence that always made me feel like I was in the right place.
Yeah.
He's such a sweetie, right? You know, like that was the most surprising thing because I knew him from his characters, which have these like, you know, very intimidating presence. And in person, he's just like goofy and fun and friendly and smiling all the time. And he was just so like, he was just a happy presence, even though, like Zach said, he was physically weak. Just so giving. He and Caitlin formed a real bond. I don't know what happened when they first met. They had like private jokes like by the end of the day that they just had a connection there. But it was really, it had that bittersweet quality because he was so generous and joyful with us. But then you could see so Craig and Sheila, who have worked on all the movies, you know, as producers, you could kind of see in Craig's face that he sort of thought this might be the last time he sees Tony. You know, so it had that kind of, I don't know, very, very, very sad to lose him.
Yeah. Broke my heart into a million pieces. Seeing your movie so many months later, though, I don't know, can't fully put it back together, but it put a much needed Band-Aid on it. And I appreciate that. I'll stick with that scene a moment longer. And the answer to this just might be a flat out no, but that's the scene where we get the Kimberly reference. Mm-hmm. Was there ever a point when you considered bringing AJ back to this franchise?
Yeah, actually, I think the very first draft we read, she walked in. He said, "And here she is."
And which was really cool. We were like, "Oh, that would be great to have her." Ultimately, we couldn't get over the fact that she was just waiting there.
Yeah, it's like
in a closet or something for them to show up.
Because they showed up randomly at the hospital. And then the more we thought about it too, this is really more a movie about him and kind of his connection and stuff. It didn't feel necessary. She never came. Some people leaked online that she was on set and stuff. That never happened. I don't even know if she was ever even reached out. It was just the very early first draft was she exists in the world. Should we bring her back? And we were like, no.
And now here to tell you her real life story, Kimberly Corman.
As much as I wanted to see the character return, what you all decided on was the right move for this story.
Yeah. But you never know. Future movies.
Yeah,
I'm going to end on some of those questions. Before I get too far ahead, though, one other thing that I guess I know my answer to, but I've heard some people discuss, so I want to get it from you just to confirm it. When it comes to the newspaper clippings with all of the people who have died in the Skyview, there isn't a single person that appears in any other Final Destination movie, is there?
We spent a long time on that wall. If anyone wants to freeze frame, there's a lot of detail in there as to what went down. But I think there is a bit of confusion about sort of the origin of the Bloodlines and how that relates to the rest of the franchise. I think one of the things we all debated early on was obviously when you have something that starts so early, you're like, oh, could this be the origin of all the other movies, right? And I think we debated that for a second, but then we realized none of those other characters' parents died. So it can't be.
It would just break the canon to do that, right? Because you meet in FD2, you meet their parents, you meet parents in FD3. It would just break FD1. It would just break those movies to do that. So that's ultimately why we didn't go that far. But Iris has studied those other premonitions. Iris has studied all those deaths to build her book so that she knows how death works, partially because of her being, an FD fan, studying all the previous deaths.
One small fun detail, though, that's in there is that we kind of decided that a lot of the people die later on in similar way to how they died at the Skyview. So there's lots of newspaper articles that kind of homage how they died at the Skyview, how they were later killed in either the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and they're all kind of related to rollerblading accidents in the 90s and all kind of specific things like that, which has been really fun.
For example, the Penny Kid who gets crushed by a piano, if you find his newspaper obituary, it says, "Pickpocket killed by piano moving truck."
Oh, I love that detail so much.
The woman who gets lit on fire is socialite dies in house fire.
I saw that one.
the maitre d' dies
in an elevator accident.
In an elevator accident. You know,
But we
so
also like
death took them in ways that were appropriate.
And Iris is sort of similar. She, in the premonition, she dies kind of skewered through the neck on this kind of piece of rubble, and then the weather vane skewers her through the neck in the kind of exact same spot. So this kind of death's coming to kind of get its collection exactly the way it wanted it.
Speaking of the back half of Iris's journey, I was very curious about the production design of her hideaway, her compound. Can you maybe pinpoint a couple details in that set that might speak to, I guess, what she's able to collect and how she feels safe enough from death in order to orchestrate all that, but also using it in a way that's protecting her?
Yeah.
Yeah, we went through a lot of iterations on the design of her compound. One of my favorite details is the wind chimes. You know, death comes on the wind in these movies. So what would you do to create an early warning system for death? And when we thought of homemade wind chimes, it just had this fun feel because it's the kind of thing you see going in and you're like, okay, that's creepy and weird. And then when they all start going at once, it makes perfect sense. So that was really fun. We definitely went back and forth a lot on the like scariness of the outside of her cabin. And it ultimately came down to she's built this place to keep people away. You know, all those spikes and stuff aren't to protect her from death. They're to keep strangers from coming in because strangers can drop pennies and do other things that could trigger Rube Goldberg's to kill her. But then on the inside, she's designed the cabin in a way that she, you know, can basically see any detail that signals that death is coming for her. We always love the moment in FD1 where Alex goes into a cabin and is opening tuna cans with oven mitts and is securing the place against death. And we love the feeling of like, what if that went on instead of one night like it does in FD1? What if that went on for 50 years? What would you do? What kind of expert would you become in all the subtle cracks that death could get into your cabin? So that was sort of where we were
There's even
coming
a
from.
nod. I don't know if you caught it, but Alex in FD1 looks up to the rafters and says, "I see you fuck," and she says the same thing, which was kind of a nod to the connection of that scene.
I like that. Well, I love me some good Easter eggs. Here's one lore thing that I was curious about. The idea of Iris ultimately getting cancer is that a move on Death's part? Like she just lasted so long that somehow Death is able to not necessarily set traditional traps, but stop her that way.
I think so, but he's not happy about it. It's like, you know, he can't get her any other way. But cancer's like boring to him. I mean, you know, obviously. Cancer's very not boring in the real world and very tragic. But in the context of FD, like that's not how he wants to do it.
There's something about the concept that gets all the more chilling to know that even if someone is able to outrun the traps,
Right.
that darkness lurks for them at the end.
Well, they can't be immortal, right? You know, but she's lived a long life. She's gone into her 80s. And so, you know, you can't live forever. But she's done a pretty good job. She's protected her entire family tree for
She didn't die of
decades.
cancer.
No.
Let's just be clear.
Is that a blood cannon at the end? And you just like
well, the one
shoot
of
the blood cannon at Caitlin's face.
which is actually kind of a remarkable feat of acting for a few reasons. One is that when your face is covered in blood, and we told her don't open your eyes because it's not the type of blood that's eye safe. She did open her eyes and was able to like continue to act. But what you don't realize is when you shoot those things, it's like an air pressurized sort of cannon full of blood right at her face. But it sounds like this. And so
It's a very silly sound.
and so you're supposed to give this incredibly dramatic, like scared out of your mind, sort of serious performance, and you hear the silliest fart noise you've ever heard right before it happens.
This is why I could never be an actor.
And like that was the most impressive part, that she didn't start laughing like hysterically.
I will say her opening her eyes there is one of the things about that moment that like I really clocked because like there's something about the type of blood that like you can tell it's just like it is so thick,
There was a
so
few
deep
times where
red.
Caitlin, like we also told her, like when you're running after the garbage truck, don't touch it. because you're an actor. You're not allowed to do any stunts. And she
well,
ran
actors
after
sometimes do crazy stuff. That's how they get hurt. They do stuff they're not supposed to because they're in the moment. So she's running alongside the garbage truck, and we knew her at that point. We're like, just don't get close enough that you can touch it.
And so she ran as fast as she could and put her hand right on it. And she's like, "You like that? You like that? That looked cool, didn't it?"
She actually
That's such an Eric thing to do.
As she's doing it, she starts grabbing the ladder and whatever. And I was like, cut, because I was worried about her. And then she came up to me with this like grin on her face. She's like, "You're welcome." And that's in the movie. This was so good.
I'll go back to the death sequences for a moment with another big 2-part question. Going into filming, which either overall sequence or maybe a specific moment in one were you most looking forward to filming, and then ultimately was that the most creatively fulfilling for you, or did a different one catch you by surprise?
Yeah, I mean, we loved all our death children. The MRI is super fun and has such great practical effects to it that would be fun to talk about. But the sky view was like just such a beautiful like orgy of death that took us over a year to figure out every detail. The scripts stage started with it and, going back and forth on the script. And then we did storyboards and then we animated the whole sequence so that we could watch it in time, put music to it, plan out every shot. And there's so many different parts to it. I mean, there was probably 6 different sets that were built. There was the main set that was built entirely out of concrete so that we could blow it up and light it on fire, safely. 120 feet across. But then there was another set for the part that's tilted where people are sliding down into the glass. And then there's another set for the one where we're underneath the dance floor and people are falling through that's lifted high up in the air. And then there's another set for the one where she's hanging on by her finger. And, and then there's a different building entirely for the lobby and the exterior.
And the sky deck too.
Oh, and another one for the sky deck where the balcony proposal happens. So those are all different pieces, and you have to know exactly which piece is happening where and how you're shooting it and, how many makeup effects bodies you need to build to rip apart. And it was just, another set for the staircase. That was a different one.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh. But it was like, we just love keeping we try very consciously to keep this sort of childhood joy of making movies and like putting all this stuff together, because that's where I think the best work comes from. And so it was this like childhood dark humor of like, how are we going to rip these people apart and burn them alive in the most fun way? And then like getting to create these little Lego set things of, how all this will come together, and then see it come together with just these epic stunts and fireballs and all the rest of it. It was just so much joy.
So many pieces to that too. And she was telling me that the actual filming of it was like split into 2 parts, and like how wowed she was by the fact that like you don't see that in the finished product. Like that's, a necessary part of movie magic. But that sequence, that opening is something else. And the pressure is pun intended, sky high for something like that. That tees the audience up for what they should expect.
Yeah, there's a specific little detail of just, if there's any filmmakers in your audience, of like the movie magicness of it, where we had one set that's completely flat, one set that's completely tilted. But how do you get between those sets? And like one of the things that we did that just delighted us to no end, because it's all in camera, is when we were shooting the flat set, it had a volume around it, right? So that you could see out the windows and you have the sunset coming in and it's all natural, real light, which is really amazing to capture in a way that's really beautiful. But because it's basically a live video game engine out there, we realized let's have everybody, we called this the Star Trek moment. Let's have everyone in the room start leaning forward. We'll pull all the furniture with like fishing line all towards the windows. But then on the volume, we'll just have the world start to like go up, because they could just literally like turn the world on the computer screen. And in the camera, when you see the horizon start to like move up and everyone leaning forward and all the furniture slide, your brain says the floor is moving, even though everyone's completely flat. And they're just like, they all feel really dumb doing it and thinking this is never going to work. And it's like, but once you put it all into the camera, it looks.
Oh, that's so smart.
Yeah.
Can you give me another example of a time filming one of these death scenes that if someone were on set and saw what it took to make that happen, they'd go like, that that looks ridiculous, but that version looks incredible.
The MRI is one of my favorite moments like that because, you have this moment where Eric is bending backwards in the MRI and the back of his head is going to touch his heels. And we did that by building a contraption that was like an old school, magician's contraption where it was a double-decker platform inside the MRI. So Richard was lying on his back on the top half with his top half, pointing up. And then there was a stunt person squeezed into the bottom half facing down. And so they were able to pull the platforms into the MRI and they just fold back to the point where and his shirt was just pinned to to the other guy's pants. So when you're watching it in person live, some of the crew even had to look away just from the practical, like getting pulled backwards because it felt like his back was breaking, which was just so much fun.
I love horror movies. I just love it.
But another fun thing about the Star Trek moment with Breck, because she's in her early 20s, everyone was talking about, okay, this is the day we're doing the Star Trek thing. This is the day we're doing the Star Trek thing. And she was panicked because she's never seen Star Trek. And she had no idea what we were talking.
She knew it was sci-fi related, so she's
like, okay, do I have to watch Star Trek now? Like, what is going on? But we're like, no, it's just because in that show they just pretended to be moving.
She likes to prep and be in the know. I love it. She's so good. All right, I gotta let you guys go soon. I'm gonna end with these two questions. First, I want to know, is there a draft of your movie where Stephanie and Charlie survive at the end?
I don't know if they ever fully survived. Did they? We had a lot of different drafts of the ending.
There was. The original draft, Stephanie does get into the cabin. It was mom died earlier and then Stephanie and Charlie try to get to Iris's cabin and she gets into the cabin and then Charlie's at the door being like, I can't lose you, Stephanie. You're going to be here. She's like, go away, Charlie. I'm going to protect you. And he left and she stayed in the cabin alive and she was just going to live Iris's life.
Which was a bit of a downer.
Yeah, a little bit.
It just felt like that's an interesting idea that she's going to become Iris, but like, you can't leave the theater on that note, I don't think. Yeah.
I get yet another change and evolution along the way. I very much understand. So now this feels like an unfair question because I don't want to box you into just making Final Destination movies for the rest of your life, but I'm also a greedy franchise fan. So I must ask you, if the opportunity presented itself, would you want to make another?
I think we've been debating that ourselves in that honestly, at this moment, we put every idea that we possibly could think of into this movie. Like every anxiety we could think of that would make for a great set piece, every small detail, every big callback that we want to do, every Easter egg, everything we could think of is in this film. I'm sure with some time, new ideas will percolate, but like we wouldn't want to make one if there weren't. Like this one with the Bloodlines thing just allowed it to be so fresh, do the premonition in a different way, found a really great way of like invigorating the character work and like it demanded to be made. We wouldn't want to make another one unless it demanded to be made. And we had another 2 hours of insanity to kind of give people. I'm sure that can be done, but currently it's a bit of a head scratcher to figure out how. But it'll take
any ideas?
It'll take some time.
I will say I appreciate that mentality quite a bit, and it makes me want to shackle you to this franchise because as much as I want more Final Destination in my life, like. Admittedly, even if it took another 14 years, if it meant waiting that long to get another movie of this quality, I will wait. I will wait.
All right.
But like the ideas feel endless. Here, I'll end with the same question that I posed to Craig the other day because I have a lot of feelings about this, but I feel like it's different coming from folks who actually made one of these movies. Do you think the possibilities are endless with the Final Destination concept? Could we get these movies forever?
I mean, one of my favorite things is the pitches that have been online. People coming up with like, you could do Final Destination on a pirate ship in the 1500s. You could do Final Destination on a spaceship, with a Star Trek crossover. Those kinds of things are really fun to imagine. I mean, I think part of what is a hallmark of Final Destination is that it's an everyday world, you know, in the suburbs of Middle America or whatever. So that's a bit of a wild stretch, but it's fun to think about.
My favorite Reddit idea was that an asteroid's coming to Earth and NASA deflects it, saving the entire planet that was marked for death. And so now literally everyone on the planet is marked for death at the exact same moment, which is just like, you could just imagine the Roland Emmerich version.
That
of
would
just like
probably
going,
be ending a franchise
like
ender right there.
Everyone on the corner, every street, every house, all at the same time, everywhere on the planet.
Did you guys see Smile 2? That's upping
concert,
it. It's that. I mean, Smile 2 doesn't go that far in the end, but that's kind of like the same leveling.
Well, they
up.
are making Smile 3, which, you know.
Which you would think it would have to.
It's an exponential increase.
That's absolutely wild. And I was talking to Craig because he did that concept trailer or teaser with Dark Ages. Like, that's something that I would love to see also.
Yeah, it is. You know, we always say death's work is never done. There's always going to be people for death to go for, and I'm sure they'll figure out a way.
I believe.
It also depends if people go to the theater and buy tickets to Final Destination Bloodlines.
I don't think you're going to have a problem with that. I mean, this is coming out after the fact, and anyone who's still with us, please have seen the movie at this point. But I don't know. You saw it in my first reaction to the movie. I had all the faith in the world in you guys and the entire team, but just so far exceeded my expectations with like a super smart, funny, scary Final Destination movie that also has just like brilliant additions to this lore, which is not easy to do in any horror franchise or any franchise at all, in any genre for that matter. So thank you and congratulations.
You're our litmus test, Perri. So it means so much that you enjoyed the movie.
Yeah,
thank you.
I mean it so sincerely. Congratulations and enjoy celebrating the big weekend I know you're going to have.
Thank you.